The Island, Chapter 2. Sometimes old wisdom isn't so good. I complained once about household chores, and my father told me to sing and act happy when I did them, even if I didn't feel that way. That's what his grandfather told him to do. So the next time I edged the sidewalk, I tried singing, la la la, in time with my cutting strokes. As near as I can figure out, it didn't help at all, and I came within half a second of being nicknamed La La Newton, as Tim Pearson came down the street from my rear and nearly caught me off guard. Will Newton. Moving proved to be easier than they'd expected. After the initial arguing had died down, Will thought of it as a small, friendly war with no prisoners. His father explained that a house came with the move, a small house located in the center of the district, provided by the State Highway Department. The old administrator was already moved out, so they rented a truck and loaded up everything in Madison, as near as Will could figure, and drove 160 miles north to unload it. Of course, there was more to the move than that. It took only 4 days and nights, but some major shifting had to be considered. Will went by Sydney's house 3 times to tell her he was leaving, but she was already at her lake home with her parents. And while the sad fact probably didn't matter to Cindy, who didn't know Will well enough to remember his name, it mattered to Will. His best friend was Judah Timmons, was no help either.
"It's kind of like dying, isn't it?" he said when Will told him he was moving north. "Kind of like just slowly dying. Thanks for cheering me up." "You're welcome. Does this mean that I get to try getting Cindy to notice me now? You know, the way you try to get her to notice you?"
And his second best friend, or equally best friend, David Collins, was just about as compassionate.
"Who are we going to try to get to ride in front of when we pay spikes now? You know, you're the only one big enough to break the wind for all of us. I mean, that destroys the summer. Maybe you could stay here alone and go up next fall."
But finally, on Sunday evening, they pulled into the rental truck, and Will held a small cage with his tomcat, Bob, in his lap, and they drove north for 4.5 hours, winding on small asphalt roads past the farms and into the northern forest, at last turning off the paved roads and taking a gravel road 4 more winding miles to the yellow house with the brown trim that looked a little old but clean in the headlights.
"Home,"
Will's father said. He was going to say something else, but stopped when he saw the look on his wife's eye. Will was sitting on the right side, and he opened the door and got out, put the cage down, stretched, then bent over and released Bob, who made a straight, gray-haired line for the small front porch, and scooted beneath it, where he sat emitting a low, throaty growl. He had never spent time in a cage, never ridden in a truck, never had to move, and apparently, Will judged, didn't think much of any of them. Leaving the truck's lights on, Will's father went up to the porch steps to the front door.
"They said they leave a key. Yep, here it is. Isn't that wonderful? They said they'd leave a key, and there it is, right where they said they'd leave it."
"Jim," Will's mother said, "is there some light in there?" As soon as she said it, the house and the front lawn were flooded with light. The minute his father found the switches, every mosquito within miles seemed to hit them. Will grabbed his mother's arm and ran for the house and got her inside, both of them slapping and scratching.
"Few mosquitoes,"
said his father.
"But the house has screens."
The house proved to be clean, with decent furniture and a stove that worked. They rummaged around in the truck to find 3 dishes and some pans, and cooked beans and franks and ate them, sitting quietly in their exhaustion. There were beds but no linen, so they spread blankets on them, and Will took the room nearest the front door. Without taking his clothes off, he sprawled out on his back. He hurt all over. To the same mental file he had begun for fetal pig dissections, he added being on the downside of a chest freezer that is being carried up from the basement and heavy wooden dressers being carried, screaming at him, "Lift! Lift!" He felt as if we were being driven into the ground, and was glad that he wasn't sharp on the bottom end, or they'd never have gotten him out. For a moment he tried to feel sad, tried to summon a mental picture of Sydney or miss his friends, but he was too tired. His eyes closed and he went to sleep, listening to the death whine of mosquitoes against the screen, and the low rumble of Bob out underneath the porch. He did not know what awakened him. One second he was asleep, and the next his eyes were open and he was staring at the ceiling, not realizing where he was or how he got there. The sun was streaming through the windows and cooking his head. He had been sleeping flat on his back, hard and down, without moving and with his mouth open. And now he was awake to taste that can only come from sleeping with your mouth open after eating half-worn beans and franks. He couldn't think of where he had packed his toothbrush. He turned his head sideways and saw a face looking at him through the window. A face so ugly it drove him off the bed and down the long wall. It was an old face, an old man's face, round with no hair, and ears that stuck out to his side. When his mouth opened in a smile, Will saw just one tooth sticking up from the bottom in the middle, and the lips were rimmed with a gummy-down substance that squeezed out the corners. The window was open, and the face emitted a sound from the screen which seemed something like, "Ugh!" Then it disappeared sideways for a moment. There was a great glopping, spitting racket, and it reappeared, a thin line of brown juice rolling down from the lower lip onto the stubbed chin, and Will thought, "I'm going to throw up if I don't quit looking at him." But he couldn't take his eyes off the face, and it was like a live Halloween mask. The face said again, "Dad?" Will thought, "Mom?" But it didn't come out. He smiled, rose up a little, and pretended to understand. "Probably a maniac," he thought. "Probably a maniac with an axe, and he needs to chop somebody up. That's why the other guy had to leave the house and his job. Axe murderers running around. I'd leave too. Emil." Now the face nodded wildly. "Ach! Emil! Me pip! Stuck!" Each word was punctuated by a brown spray that left the screen dripping. Will had to look away, but now he knew something. It was a name. Emil, ach, was his name. Nice name. Nice for an axe murderer. Probably had a chainsaw up there. High-tech axe murderer. Will stood and moved carefully along the wall to the door, nodding and smiling all the way, and when he got to the door, he slid sideways out of the room and almost screamed, "Mom! Dad!" No answer. In the kitchen there was a note on the table. They had found him, Will imagined, holding the note from his mother in his hand, the axe buried to the handle in his skull, the wall splattered with... He shook his head. "Ach! Ach! Sneep! Nip! Hup!" Will turned and saw the man standing now at the open front door, looking at him through the screen. He was wearing bib overalls with no shirt, and there were tufts of hair on the tops of his shoulders. In his right hand he was carrying a shovel, and Will had a momentary picture of the shovel buried in his skull, with the note in his hand. But he couldn't make the idea of a crazy shovel murderer work, so he walked to the front door. "Can I help you?" The question brought wild nodding, and the man gurgled and spat over the side of the porch. A great brown stream that nearly hit Bob, who was coming out to investigate, and went back. Probably for life, Will thought, and pointed up the road. Will leaned against the screen, one eye on the shovel, and looked up the road to where an old pickup truck was stuck just off the shoulder in the soft mud. "Oh," Will said, "you're stuck." More wild nodding. "Emil, ach, hip, nup, snuck!" The man turned and jumped off the porch and started up the road, waving for Will to follow him. "Yash, coming up!" Feeling rather silly, Will followed. The truck had gone just a few inches too far off the road, and the ditch mud had taken the rear wheel in and down. In the back, the truck was a nondescript small hound with bits of hair gone and dirt stuck here and there. And when Will came near the tailgate, it made a concentrated effort to lick his face without actually leaving the truck, leaning farther and farther out until it was teetering, slobbering, like a tongue on the end of a motor. "Yubash! I drive you!" Will nodded, got in the back of the right side to the rear of the sunken road, and settled his shoulders into the tailgate. Now the dog could reach him, and a stuck tongue hid in his ear that felt as if it went halfway through his head at the same time that Emil gunned the engine. There was a mighty spray of mud, most of which splattered the front of his pants and t-shirt and face as the truck lurched, jumped forward, and was gone, leaving Will face down in the road, with another entry to add to his list of fetal pigs, chest freezers, and dressers. He walked slowly to the house and was just about to get to the porch when his father and mother drove up. "What happened to you?" his mother asked once she got out of the car. "When we left you were asleep." "Emil," Will pointed vaguely down the road. "Stuck. He driving. Gone. Lala." With that he went into the house, letting the door slam behind him. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he found a clean spot on his t-shirt, a little patch around to the side where the mud hadn't hit. and used it to swab the dog slobber out of his ear. It was not, he decided, a good start. Perhaps not as bad as it could have been. The dog, for instance, could have had rabies, and Emil could have turned out to be a mad scientist with nuclear capabilities. That might have been worse, but all in all, it was not a really good start in the new home, and this was only the first day.